The first way to export a DXF for cutting something on the laser cutter is to use your sketches. Now this is just an ornament and it has no fitting parts together. So I'm not actually concerned about the laser kerf or a size tolerance to allow for clearance between intersecting parts. So I'm really just going to cut out this profile or this shape. The best way to do this is you can actually right-click your sketch and say Save as DXF. Now what I recommend doing is to create a new sketch on top of your part. So I'm going to get out of the sketch that I currently am in and select New Sketch. I'm going to select the surface of the body that I want to actually cut out. And then I'm going to project the geometry from the bodies. So under Create, Project, and I'm going to switch my selection filter to Bodies and just select the actual wooden ornament. Select OK. And you can see it's projected all of those edges into one single sketch. I can say select Finish Sketch, and then I can just right click and select Save as DXF. I'm just creating a folder to save my file. And then from here, I can prepare it in my vector program, which I'm going to be using Illustrator. But first, I'm going to show you option 2. There's a second way to export laser files. When you have a part that has interlocking parts like these box joints, and this lid on this box that actually rotates around and hinges open, you want to allow for tolerances for these pieces to actually fit together, but you also want to accommodate for laser kerf. That's the width of that really fine laser that will actually burn the material from either side of its path. So to accommodate that, there is a plugin that you can install, and it's found right here once you have it installed. To actually get it on Fusion, you can go to Tools, Add-ins, and go to the Fusion 360 Application Store. I'm going to search DXF Laser, and you can install this by selecting Download. Once you have it installed, you actually have to close Fusion and reopen it to see the plugin take effect under Create. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to run the plugin, and this allows me to set the tolerance that I want for the laser kerf. I would recommend running some tests, and I've identified that 0.25 millimeters works really well for what I want for a tight fit. So then you select the face that you want to cut. Unfortunately, you have to only select one face at a time. So I'm going to select this face, select OK, and I'm just going to create a folder to save all of these files. And I've already named them in Fusion 360, so it's going to keep things organized, but I'd recommend titling all your pieces so you know which ones are which. Then repeat this for all of the pieces in your design. By right-clicking and dragging, I can quickly repeat this process. Once you've exported all of your pieces as DXF files with the included tolerance, we are now going to minimize Fusion 360. Now we're going to open up Adobe Illustrator 2020, not Adobe Illustrator 21. So when I open up the Finder, I want to make sure I'm choosing the older version of Illustrator because there is a bug in 2021 that has a slight problem with scaling DXF files. So if you run into this issue, try using the older version. Just go to the Creative Cloud app and make sure you're logged into your account and you can reinstall the older version. Once you open up Adobe Illustrator 2020, we're going to start by creating a new document. This document should be the size of our laser cutter. I'm going to first just title this Laser Cut Box, and then I'm going to specify the width as 19 inches. So first change your units to inches, and the height is going to be 11. This is the engravable size on my Glowforge laser cutter. If you have smaller material that you're going to be cutting, I'd recommend just making it the size of your stock material or the size of the bed of your laser cutter. Select Create. And this white canvas is now the size of my laser cutter or my material. So if you don't see what I'm seeing in Illustrator, just go up to Windows and choose Workspace and Essentials Classic. I'm going to be working with layers and properties for the most part and using the selection arrows. So first I'm going to go to File, Place, and for that first file I exported, the Mando ornament, I can just go ahead and select it and place it on my document. Now if you notice that it's scaling weird, what I recommend doing is just selecting the entire design and going over to Properties and double check its size. Looking at the width and the height, I can easily scale this by constraining the proportions or the ratio and coming over here and making it, let's say I wanted it 3 by 5, and now the whole thing scales. The other thing you can do is when you say File, Open, and you can choose your DXF this way, make sure that it's the original size and you're not scaling anything. If your Fusion file was in metric and you're going to use the scale factor 25.4 because there's 25.4 millimeters in an inch, or you basically have to figure out the conversion for whatever unit you are working in to what it is now. I'm going to keep it the original size and I'm not going to scale the line weights. That way every file I place on my artboard will come in properly. So this is actually ready to export and laser cut. One thing I like to do is I like to just make sure the stroke is a pretty thin stroke so I can get a good understanding of what it's going to look like, and I change all my cut paths to red. If I want different order of operations, I then come in here and individually select certain paths, and I would change that stroke to a different color. That way in my Glowforge, I could make this light blue color cut first, and then the red would cut last, or I could change the order of operations. If I want an engrave, I would need to select this shape and make sure it is fill. So I would come in here with the direct selection tool, select whatever shape I wanted to be filled, and just reverse the fill and stroke. If you have an issue, what's happening right now is that's not actually an enclosed stroke. So a simple Illustrator solution is to select your path. As long as these points are touching, I can use the shortcut Command J, which is join all these paths. I should be able to select the entire path and then revert the fill to an enclosed shape, and it will actually engrave or give me the option to engrave in my laser cutter app. I'm going to delete this, and now I'm going to work on placing the pieces for my box design. So I'm going to go to File, Place, and locate all of my DXF files. I'm going to just select all of them, select Place, and I can go ahead and just add swatches. What this will actually do is preserve the colors of the DXF files. If you don't care about order of operations, just choose Merge Swatches and it will all just be one single color stroke. So now I can position each of my files, and I'm just going to space them and move them later. So you can see the fact that I kept the swatches, I have red and I have blue. That way, when I come into the laser app, I'll actually cut the red first and then the blue, or I could change the colors in Illustrator and specify that. So now what I'm going to do is start to move around my files. The other thing I like to do as I work is I like to actually keep these in separate layers. As you can see, they've come in groups, so I actually am fine with that. If you were to want to separate your objects, what you can do is select it while they're still separated, hit Command X for cut, create a new layer, and hit Command Shift V for paste in place, and that will actually give you a separate layer that you can easily select right here, and it will let you move around just that piece, which helps you kind of position things really tightly. And if you have overlapping shapes, this makes it a lot easier to work. I have mine in groups, so I'm just going to go ahead and go with that. To rotate an object, I'm going to first select it, hold Command, and I can rotate it into lock, or to rotate every 40 degrees, hold Shift as you're rotating, and that way it keeps it perpendicular or every 45 degrees. So I'm going to position these to maximize the material that I'm going to be using. So basically putting them close together. I'm going to rotate the lid, place it close to here, and then position these sides pretty tight. If I can rotate it to be this orientation, that's what I would do. However, I'm getting pretty close to running off the material, so this is where it's better to be safe than sorry, and I'm just going to rotate it like so. Now I have all my pieces oriented in a way that really maximizes the use of material. I could align these a little bit better. And if you brought in a part that you have to duplicate, like I actually don't have the other wall, the front wall I'm actually missing. So to duplicate this, I can actually just hold down the Option or Alt button and drag it, and it will duplicate this part for me to just cut out the back panel instead of actually exporting a separate DXF. Once you have all of your parts oriented properly, you're going to go to File, Save As, and you're going to save this as an SVG. And this is what you're going to upload to the app.glowforge.com. If you have an image, it's very important that you choose Embed. And one other thing before you actually export is if you had type. If I wanted to engrave this on my box. For now, the Glowforge app doesn't actually recognize this text as a shape to engrave. So what I have to do is convert it in Illustrator to a shape. So select it once, choose type, and choose create outlines. This is now a shape. It's equivalent to if I were to actually draw each of these by hand. I'd recommend changing its color to make sure it's different from your cut paths so it shows up as a different order of operations. If you want to include patterns, you could obviously draw your own. However, I personally like to use these two websites, freepik.com or vecteezy.com, and they have some great artwork that others have created that are willing to share as long as you give them credit. So just make sure your filter is set to free. And I've just searched for geometric patterns, and let's just use this one for an example. I really like this one. So I'm going to select download. So I'm going to just open that up in Illustrator. And what you're looking for is either the AI file or this EPS. So it's opened in preview, but what I want it to do is open in Illustrator. So here's the pattern. I'm actually going to copy this, and I'm going to create a new layer in my working document that I'm going to cut. So I'm just going to paste it in this layer for now, and I'll just title this layer pattern. And right now it's really large, and I want it to be just inside of, let's say I want to engrave the lid with this pattern. I don't want it to go all the way to the edge, so I'm going to do something a little fancier. I'm going to first make sure I duplicate the lid, which is this layer here. So I'm going to select it. Right here in the top corner, I can just say duplicate group. And I'm going to hide the original and just lock it so I don't mess it up. So this group is now its own file, and I'm going to first offset this path. And I basically want it to go inward, so I'm going to go a negative direction. Now it's actually going outward, and it's because this is not actually an enclosed path. So what I'm going to do is select it, choose path, and join. The shortcut is Command J again. So now this is an enclosed shape. Before they were just individual lines. So let's try this again. I'm going to select it, object, path, offset path. So now it's going in, and this is perfect. So that inside path is what I'm going to use to mask out the pattern. So leaving that alone, this is essentially, right here is my mask shape. So this is the profile I started with. Basically the same as the master copy. I'm going to come over, scale my image or my pattern to what I want, make sure it can actually fit. If it goes slightly beyond, it's okay. I'm just looking to see where the cutoff boundary will actually be. So I want it to go a little bit beyond, but I don't want it to I want it to be symmetrical essentially. So I'm looking at the top of that pattern to the box, and it's cutting kind of through here and there. That's fine. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to drag the offset above the pattern. So here's the shape, which I'll just fill so you can see it pretty easily. So this blue shape is going to act like a crop window on the pattern. So I'm going to select the shape, and I'm going to select all of the pattern. If I hold shift, it's going to select everything from top to bottom. Now I'm going to go to Object, Clipping Mask, Make. As you can see, it's Command 7 is the shortcut, and now it's basically masked that shape perfectly. If you want a score line, what I recommend doing is duplicating this shape or just coming back, selecting it, and putting a stroke around it that you can then score. After I make the clipping mask, it's actually just masking out the pattern, which most of the time this is actually fine and I could move on from here. However, the Glowforge app doesn't like a clipping mask. As you can see here, I've already uploaded the file, and when you actually go through this process, it gives you this message: this design contains a clipped path, and it basically unclips it and shows you the original rectangle and the original pattern. So to remedy this in Illustrator, after you create, so if I come back a step, I have my shape, I have my patterns, and I hit Command 7 to mask it. What you're going to do next is basically make it permanent, where you come into Pathfinder and you choose Crop. If you don't see this Pathfinder window, you can come up to the Windows option, choose Pathfinder, and then you're looking for this little symbol here, which is Crop. Make sure all of your clipping path is selected before you do this. And what this does is it basically chops off each of those individual shapes, and there is no longer a clipping path, and this is permanent. So now I can save this as an SVG. Now I can close Illustrator and come into the Glowforge app. So you go to app.glowforge.com, use the student account to log in. If you don't remember what that is, go to Schoology and look up the account information. We're going to choose Create, Upload from File, and here is my box pattern. So you can see I have the engrave first. I'm going to set the engrave settings. I have these smaller things that I want to cut out first. The reason I want to do this is because if there's any shifting, I want to make sure it cuts out the smaller shapes. So what I'm going to do is drag this up in the order, and now I can choose the cut settings, and then I can choose the profiles to cut. One thing I noticed is once I cropped the pattern, I lost that line. So if you did want that score line, now's the time to actually reveal that duplicate layer that we created. But I actually don't really care so much, so I'm not going to leave it alone. So all of your files should be read. If it's not read, this is because this is an engraved shape, and for some reason the engrave area on the Glowforge is slightly smaller than the cut area. So you can see here when you select something with an engrave, there's this boundary around it. So you just need to pull that in a little bit further than what you would need to for just a cut path. So this is actually ready. Obviously I need to turn on my laser and change the material, but we have successfully taken our design out of Fusion, taken it into Illustrator, laid it out for its machine operations, and then also applied this really unique pattern. So I hope your design turns out awesome, and I look forward to seeing how it turns out.